Hey y'all, happy Monday. So, um, coming into the beginning of the year, I was praying about where we go, what He has for us to dig into first. And you all know that I love Psalm 1. And I really had that on my mind and thought that's what we would do, that we would start out the year with Psalm 1, which we have done several times. But the more that I prayed about it, the more that the hope of promise just kept coming back. And then in digging into the hope of promise and what our promise is, and how we um, keep it and hold on to it, I really found out that Psalm 1 was in the hope of promise. And so this week we're going to really unravel those things together, and not just switching gears and getting into Psalm 1, but really looking at the importance of the Word. And I know that you're going to hear Caleb throughout these videos, so I hope that you enjoy his serenading in the background. And for those of you who did not see yesterday, we will be welcoming baby boy number 4 late this summer. So thank y'all for walking with me through Caleb just a year and a half ago, and we're going to do it again this year. And I, in my type A control personality, am really having to dig my heels in and find my hope of promise in the Lord, and that nothing takes Him by surprise, nothing catches Him off guard, and that for whatever life looks like and whatever steps are in front of us, that He's with us. And not only is He with us, but He's given us promise for those steps. So last week we talked about Abraham from the Weiss translation, which y'all know is my favorite. And we read that in view of the promise of God, he did not vacillate in his fear of unbelief. And that's right after he's talked about the severity and the impossibility of his circumstance. So his body was as good as dead as he was 100, and Sarah's womb had always been barren. Moreover, in view of the promise of God. And just as a reminder, moreover means also and more importantly. So Abraham's body is as good as dead, and Sarah's body is barren. But more importantly, in view of the promise of God. And that in view of the promise of God is the only place that it's possible. It's the only place where what God has given us, that desire, that hunger, that impossible situation, in view of the promise, is the only place that it's possible. And so if we are going to stay in a place of faith, we are going to have to keep the basis of our faith, the reason for our hope, has to stay in front of our eyes. Well, what good does that do? What good does it do to keep the promise in front of your eyes? Well, David said in Psalm, I would have perished, I would have died, had I not believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. If I had not believed. And in order for us to believe, we've got to see it. We've got to know it. It's got to move from our head into our hearts, and our spirits have to be so convicted by it that, like Abraham, the impossibility of our circumstance does not matter, because God gave me a promise. God has given me His word. And I saw something somebody had shared this in the past week, maybe on Facebook, and it said something to the effect of, when you can't hear him, go read him. And sometimes the voices that are screaming in our heads get so loud, and there's so many of them. But if you go put your eyes on the Word, if you go sit down and you begin to read about His goodness, and you begin to read about His faithfulness, all of the other chaos and confusion begins to silence. And then we begin to hear Him. We begin to see Him clearly. And so we're going to dig in tomorrow about viewing the promise. I'll see you then. Bye, y'all.